Good morning, Cheryl. Good morning, Sharon.
Hi from virtual land.
Good to see you.
You too. I'll be driving to an appointment while I listen. So whatever I miss, I think you're recording this, right?
I sure am.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Hey, Cheryl.
Hi.
Good morning.
We got to stop meeting like this.
Yes, exactly.
Funny. Are you headed back from Florida or going to Florida?
No, I'm actually headed to a listing appointment. So
good.
in
Good,
Georgia,
good.
yeah. Not listing until March, but one of those reasons I was like, oh, we're going to family reunion right before it.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Yeah, I know. It seems like there's longer time frames now for people from listing to literally, I mean, from first appointment to listing.
Yes.
Longer.
Yes, for sure.
The last
That's
one
right.
started in September and we didn't list till January.
Yep. Absolutely. But I'm glad she's doing this class. I had some survey issues in Florida. So the
Oh,
more knowledge we have, the better.
yes, indeed. And surveys is one of those gray areas. Not too many people know much about it because we don't do it that often versus
Right.
Florida where you have to do it.
Right. Exactly.
All
All right. Well, I'm gonna get on mute here and get in the car. See you
Okay.
guys. Bye.
Bye.
So Ashley did call. She's gonna be a few minutes late, so you guys just sit tight. Don't worry, she's coming. All right?
All my business, it might be the
So if you'll do me a favor, if you see more people come in and they ask, if you could answer that question for me, but she should be here
On it,
shortly, okay?
on it.
Thanks, guys.
Anytime, girl.
I just.
I'll learn about it. I'm gonna learn
She's
about
coming.
it.
She's running a little late, but she'll be here. So y'all come on in and have a seat, okay? And thank you for being here in person.
I live a mile from here, so I think the laziest person.
Hello there, how are you?
I got a situation anyway with the survey.
Oh, well,
So,
timing,
good
perfect
timing.
timing.
Yeah.
Exactly. We'll learn from it.
Yeah.
For the whole class off, my, that's just one question, keep it, drag the whole class. Oh, Peter says it's too cold, you're ready.
Hey, how are you? This is a tiny little group that braved the cold.
On that.
Nice cozy little group.
Yeah.
Morning.
Morning.
What's happening, Captain? How you doing? Just for you.
How's it going, man?
What's going on, guys? Tony, Ed? See you, man. How's it going?
How's it going, buddy? How's it going?
See you.
Good, man. Good to see you.
How's your kid, Tony?
Oh, goodness.
Playing still? Well, not this time of year, but.
No, they actually start tryouts was, Monday, for upperclassmen, so, it's,
Try it for what?
baseball.
My God, can you imagine hitting a ball, getting metal bat right now?
Getting hit by a ball.
Oh, yeah. Square.
Yeah.
They're actually quite lucky because, it was warm Monday, it was like.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
Monday, 60 degrees.
And so, yeah, they canceled, practice yesterday, but they'll be out there today though.
Well, no, next week we got 60 again.
Yeah, but they'll be out there again today.
Today.
Oh, yeah.
Outside, not indoors?
What's that?
Mother Nature.
Whoa.
Oh, yeah.
They'll probably be hitting, like indoors, they'll do something, they won't have.
Right.
They'll be doing something, but yeah, they got it today.
That's
so.
crazy, man.
There'll be no sliding today, cause it'd be like sliding on asphalt.
Right.
No sliding.
I mean, but I walked down my yard today and it was crunchy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Solid, like
Well,
solid.
I stepped out on the deck and I was like, wow, it's like you can, like the ice that was on the
It's
deck.
slip,
It was
it's
like,
slip.
Yeah, I was like, oh, goodness.
I was out yesterday installing those things you put in the faucets outside.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
And the wind was whipping, and,
Oh, yeah, we were putting blankets.
oh, yeah, okay.
We did a lot of landscape work this past year right before our wedding, and the HOL will replace anything that's like builder installed.
Okay.
When it freezes, but if it's ours, it's like, it's
It's yours.
dead, we gotta pay for it, so we were out.
You were downtown Norfolk, right?
Yeah, so we were at the Home Depot last night picking up blankets, which are, like the blanket things that are
Sure.
designed for plants, pavers, putting them all around. I mean,
Around there, yeah. In the
just
cold
looks like
and
one
wind.
big green tarp in our yard right now.
Oh, my God.
Porch plants, covered those in plastic bags and tucked them under.
Right.
And my
Yeah.
dog loves it. My dog, he loves the cold. She's an Aussie.
Oh, no wonder. Okay.
He loves the cold.
Not an Eskimo once, an American Eskimo, and that thing we just loved when it was
Oh,
cold.
she
and
jumps up
icy.
and down like
Probably.
he in Jack.
Probably hates it when it's hot.
So you gotta shave, they like 3 or 4 coats, and you
Yeah.
gotta shave it down to the 2 coats down into the 4.
Ashley's coming, she's gonna be late for the people in Zoom land.
She's
here.
She's here.
Ashley's here, she's just still late.
Thanks, Tony.
That morning sickness stuff.
Yeah.
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 So sorry, guys.
Good morning.
Good.
And congrats in person. I'm so excited for you guys.
Thanks, we are thrilled.
Those pictures on Facebook were
Like,
awesome.
what happened?
Bum.
Woo!
One baby boy.
Nice.
So hopefully, maybe I'll make a good kicker.
Wait, I forgot the
Wait.
full name.
Oh,
Whit McCrory Connor.
with my car, that's right.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah. Well, I was telling Christine in the bathroom, how to stop driving your car immediately and leave the engine running, like, so that's why. I'm late, so again, I'm sorry about that.
Good.
Okay, I do have copies of these, and they're not all stapled pretty. Again, we're gonna blame the car. But there's a little packet here. Because what we're gonna do, there's a few slides I have, but really I wanted to go through a bunch of examples of surveys.
John Doe,
I know, he's an important guy.
I've seen him, so it's actually James.
See the trigger, the next one?
That's not as good when we.
Oh, this is the whole package, okay.
Yeah, the tag at the end of the.
That's what I'm saying, not a great thing to be a John. And that's everybody, right? Awesome. Oh, into Zoom world.
Did you do that thing last night? No, when was that? Yeah, the Flippy Mojitos?
Tonight,
Oh, it's tonight.
yeah, it's a Wednesday.
Wednesday,
So
that's
it's the
fine.
third Wednesday of
Yeah,
every
yeah,
month, so
that's
if you wanna come tonight, we will be there.
7 to 9, right?
What is it? It's 6, starts at 6
Oh.
and goes until like 8:15-ish.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a networking event, they do charge for it now, so it's $5 ahead of time, $10 at the.
Well, I think it's 10 and 20 or something. The way they advertised was 10 and 20.
Oh, really?
I hope it's 5 and 10, yeah. I
Well,
would say it makes sense.
last year it was.
It was 5 and 10.
But it could be 10 and 12.
Yeah.
But anyway, y'all know me, I'm Ashley with O'Kelly. I'm gonna go through a couple slides on surveys just to give you guys background info, and then we'll actually look at a whole bunch of surveys and walk through how to read them. So, first off, what is a survey? So really the point of a survey is to actually show the boundary line of the property. And that sounds kind of elementary to explain, but a lot of times, like at the closing, I have a document signed that says y'all didn't get a survey to send to us. And they're like, a survey for what? And they think I mean like a customer satisfaction survey. So I think kind of just word of wisdom, I would explain what a survey is when you're talking to your client, because they probably are not thinking like a boundary line survey. So that's what most people get it for. There's a bunch of different kinds of surveys, so depending on what your client wants, they might want something a little bit more in-depth, showing a couple different things, but most people are wanting to know the boundary lines, and then they're wanting to know where the actual buildings exist on the property, whether there's any encroachments, whether there's any easements, whether they're within the boundary lines, setback lines, buffer zones, that kind of thing, okay? How new do we think a survey should be to use it for closing? What do we think?
30 days.
30 days is fine. What's kind of the outer limit that you think is maybe safe to use?
6 months.
Say a year.
Yeah, I would say 6 months or a year. I mean, the more recent you can get, the better. But I think that's important because a lot of times sellers will say, oh, I have a survey. You don't need one. But their survey is from when they bought it in 1972.
Right.
Well, don't we think a lot could have happened to the property since 1972? First off, the measuring tools are gonna be different. So it might be that they say, we own 10 feet or 100 feet this direction, but it might actually be like 100.7 feet, which changes the parameters of the property a little bit. The measuring tools change. More importantly, since 1972, the neighbor could have built a fence that's 6 feet onto the property. They could have built a house with a deck added onto it. So a survey, although it might show pretty close to the actual boundary, as far as the encroachments and easements go, you want to know really what's on my property right now, or what's on the property I'm gonna buy right now, not 1972. And if you have one from like 2 years ago, you look at the property, you see that there's a fence, it shows a fence, that might be fine, so I wouldn't say like stick really hard and fast to 6 months or a year. Just know that a lot can happen even in a year, right? Building fences and whatnot, so you want that updated new one. That being said, having one from the seller is a heck of a lot better than not having one at all, right? Because at least you'll see some of it. Because a lot of like the utility easements are gonna be on there if the seller got a survey when they bought it, right? What's not as helpful and what people get confused on a little bit is gonna be the plat. So who knows what the difference is between a plat and a survey?
Isn't the plat by done by the developer? Perhaps, no?
It can be,
Okay.
yeah, so when we're
Plat?
talking. What?
A plat isn't gonna have all the easements and things like that, is it, Ashley?
It can. So really the difference is a plat is a recorded survey. When we talk about plats in general, we're typically selling property in a neighborhood, right? That's most of the work that y'all do is not like a giant piece of land, it's gonna be in a neighborhood. And that plat, exactly like you said, Ivan, is gonna be when the builder platted out the subdivision. So they bought 20 acres of land, and then they subdivided it into all of these individual parcels. And then they filed that with the county. So A, it's gonna be old every single time. B, it's not gonna show a single house or fence because they do it before they build anything, okay? So when people normally talk about a plat, because we're normally talking about a neighborhood, it is gonna be that larger scale thing. So it might have those original easements, Sandy, like the utility easements that run through. There's easements between neighborhoods, golf courses, that kind of thing, that could show up on there. But if there's an easement, like property A's fence encroaches onto property B, then that's not gonna show up on like your subdivision plat. When we're talking about acreage, the plat is just gonna be the recorded survey, and you can have that for neighborhoods too. If like an individual lot decides to record their particular survey, we just don't see them doing that a whole lot.
So the plat is always prior to build, and an as-built survey is literally as it was built,
Well,
like after.
no, so a plat, like I could go get a survey of my piece of property today and I could record that with the county and it's a plat. So, and I have a house
Okay.
like sitting on there. But most of the time, if a builder is doing it, it's gonna be before they build anything, because they wanna define the property lines. And then they wanna, of course, build within those property lines, right? So a lot of people say, hey, can I get a copy of my survey? We don't have a survey because nothing has been recorded. We have a plat, and they're like, oh yeah, I need that to put a fence in. No, you need to go get a new survey to do that. So don't let them conflate the two. How often do you guys think, or on what percentage of transactions should you guys be recommending a survey?
100.
Not quite 100%, you don't need them for a condo, right? Because a condo, you don't actually own any of the land.
Right.
But excluding condos, then yes, absolutely, 100% of the time, you should be recommending that they should get it. You should be recommending that they get it, and you should be doing that in writing. So that when they come back
Right.
6 years later and say, hey, nobody told me the fence was over the property line, you can say, hey, remember when I told you that you needed a survey? This is why. No, you never said that. Here's that email. And then you're done, right? Because that's not gonna show up on a title exam. It's just an encroachment. The only things that show up on a title exam are things that have been recorded with the county. So if the neighbor builds a fence over and it's 6 feet onto the property, but nobody notices, nobody's recorded anything with the county. The county's not looking at the measurements and
Right.
noting those kind of things. So it's important to have both, okay?
Why do you need a survey for a town?
Because you still own some of the
The
land.
land.
So for the same reason, like if the fence is over, and sometimes what can happen is if there is some sort of like sewer easement, let's say. You don't want that to run underneath the actual structure. So you wanna be checking for those things as well. Because what the sewer easement is gonna say is that the county, the city, whoever that easement is granted to, can access that area to be able to update, maintain, fix, et cetera, that sewer line. And so what they have to do to get to that sewer line is tear down the townhome. That's kind of a bummer, because it's your house, right? So you don't wanna look at a survey and see that a sewer easement runs through it. Now, other easements like lighting, if the light runs above the townhome, that might be fine. So it's not all easements, but by and large, they try to make easements, utility easements run not under a structure for that reason. And does that happen a lot? No. And if it does run under the structure, does it happen often where they have to tear down the structure?
Yeah.
No, but it can. And so you don't want to invest all this money in a home knowing that someone could make you tear it down, or they could come tear it down because they have this easement and you've allowed them to access that property and then prevented the access by putting a structure on it. So that might be the main reason I say that for a townhome. But again, the fence and knowing what your actual property lines are too. Because sometimes townhomes, like you might have two like rows of them that back up to a creek. How far do you own into the creek? Do you own any of the creek? And what are those setback lines? So if there are buffer zones, if there is a creek, how close to the creek are you allowed to build? And that kind of thing is still important for a townhome.
Okay.
I would say, yeah.
So, no way can we get it done during due diligence, so what happens? Because
Right.
So Exact question right there. So really anything that comes up that is a title issue does not have to be taken care of during the due diligence period. So what the contract says is that the seller will deliver marketable title, which means the title insurance company will insure that without any sort of extra exception. And so if something on the survey would be required to be a specific exception, then the seller is not delivering what they promised to deliver. So your buyer has the opportunity all the way up until closing to say, hey, you need to fix this or I don't have to buy the property. Examples of that would be some sort of encroachment one way or the other. Even if it's the property they're looking at buying, if that fence is encroaching on the neighbor's property, then that's still a title issue, right? Now, most of the time, I will tell you guys that any neighborhood with an HOA is gonna require fences connect. So there's going to be somewhat of an encroachment on every single one, because it's hard to make it perfectly straight and like how thick is the fence and that kind of stuff gets a little bit tricky, and they don't allow for there to be gaps, like 99% of the HOAs. So stuff like that, you know, be pragmatic when you're talking to your client about whether it's really an issue. If it's that, you know, the fence is encroaching an inch or two in either direction,
Yeah,
it's probably not a big deal. It'll be an exception on the title insurance policy, meaning the title insurance company is not gonna step in and help them fight any kind of battle regarding that fence encroachment. They still have a policy, they're still insured for everything else they would be insured for. They just can't use the title insurance to try to move that fence or make the neighbor move it, that kind of thing. So that's not a big sacrifice.
so in summary, if due diligence is 5 days, but it's gonna take 3 weeks to get the survey. And closing is 30 days out, so I'm still getting a survey before closing, something comes up like an encroachment, I can still. The seller has to, well, you negotiate it at that point, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Now, what doesn't come up is, let's say your seller says, I wanna put a pool in the back. You get the survey back, you're outside of due diligence, you see a pool doesn't fit. That's not a title issue, that's a preference issue.
Right, sure.
So if you have a client that says, I wanna put a pool in the backyard, or maybe it's really important to me to have an 18 by 18 foot greenhouse in the back. You wanna put some sort of contingency in your contract so that they can review that survey and make sure that they are able to build whatever it is that they wanna build. Because those things, again, not a title issue. So when you're talking to your clients, it's, hey, I recommend you get a survey, right? And you put that in writing. And then you're talking to them about what they want to do with the property, what their plans for it would be. And you're not necessarily always going to get that info up front, like in the greenhouse example. You might have no idea that these people love plants and they tell you like the day before closing, I want a greenhouse. At that point, okay, I hope you can do it, and like you move on. But if you know at your buyer consult that these people are big time like plant growers and they own nurseries and they want to be able to do that in the backyard, then you really want to stress, we want to get a survey to make sure that you're gonna have room to build that. We want to get the HOA documents to make sure you are allowed to have a pool, a greenhouse, whatever it is. But anytime someone wants to add on, you really want to stress the survey. Because what a buffer zone is, and going kind of back a couple there, what a buffer zone is like distance from the water you're allowed to build, but then surveys also show building setback lines. And so what that means is how far in from your property line are you allowed to build on? And so if you have a 20-foot bound, like a 20-foot setback line, and then you build over that, the county can require you to take that structure down. So can you build in that? Maybe, but you need to get what's called a variance from the county, where the county specifically approves you building the thing in that particular zone or reduces that zone for you.
Right.
And they have these things because you don't want houses like literally touching each other at the property line.
The variance gets reported, correct?
Not always.
So how would they,
The county, like, you know how counties keep track of permits? It's the same sort of idea. So it can be, but a lot of times it's not reported. So it's calling the county. So you get the survey, you see that it's in that. And depending on how savvy like the owner is, you might say, hey, did you get a variance? And they may say, yep, it's right here, got it, you call the county and verify. Most of the time, especially like on the residential side, they're not gonna be savvy enough to know what that even is, which probably means they don't have one, but you just call the county. Now, the danger about calling the county is, hey, do you have a variance for this property? No, let me go look at it. Now, that's a real problem. So
Right.
it's kind of a catch 22, but
Yeah.
the county obviously will know whether they granted it, kind of like a keep track of permits on it. But it's still good for you to know, because what you don't want is for your client to buy the property, have the house be over that setback line, and then they get into a tiff with the neighbor who just happens to, know what that setback line is. They call the county, we got an issue. Because that's where most of these things are coming up, whether it's on the permit side or like a setback line, or a buffer zone kind of thing, is you make someone else in the neighborhood mad and they're coming for you.
Right.
Is really why that comes up the most. It's always good to get a survey before you buy a property. You can totally get it after, but you wanna buy it before, because what if, and this is an extreme example, but it did happen where this builder, they platted the subdivision, and then they built every house, like 1/3 onto the neighbor's lot. That's a problem, right? The whole neighborhood was like that. But if you know that before you buy it, maybe you don't buy that house, because that's a real problem. Or if it's something simple, like not as big of a deal, a fence issue, maybe you can talk to the neighbor and have the fence moved. More likely, what you would do is get some sort of easement with the neighbor. And the reason you want the easement is because if the neighbor has the fence on your piece of property, what you don't want is for eventually them to own that piece of property through adverse possession.
Right.
You don't want to be responsible for taking care of your property on their side of the fence. You don't want to be responsible for taking care of the fence. So you get the easement saying, hey neighbor, you can totally keep your fence on my land, but you're responsible for the upkeep of the fence. You're responsible for the upkeep of my land that's in your fence, and you understand it's still my land. Because one element of adverse possession is that it's like open, notorious, but also the other side, like they don't know. So I'm saying, I know you're on my land and you cannot have it.
I don't have an easement right now, like we're under contract and, there's a wall and a fence that's encroaching and there's an easement, but in the easement, it says that if this wall ever comes down and you put it back up, it has to be on the right side of the property.
And you can put stuff like that in there, and that makes all the sense in the world to do that. It's like, hey, I don't want you to have to redo it, but in the event you do it right. And that's another benefit to the owner of the land as well. And you'll see things like joint driveway agreements, like you share the driveways on both properties, then you can kind of disperse the upkeep and costs of that and make a plan for it, but it's better than having no idea who's supposed to keep up with it. Did you have a question, Jim?
So walk me through. So I guess, my situation is, I have clients who kind of did the same thing. They had a survey done and the land, all the land on the street is actually at an angle, like it's like this. But all the houses are built like this. So there's like the back corner, here's the one, it's a little bit. The people on this side of him have actually built, another living, ADU, what is it?
Yeah. accessory.
Another,
Yeah.
another thing, in their little corner. He knows that, but should he go get an easement? So he's just waiting for one day when his neighbor makes him mad and be like, hey, tear this thing down because it's on my property.
So the other thing to think about there is you can also have what's called a prescriptive easement. So adverse possession is you eventually gain ownership of something. A prescriptive easement is you've been using it for so long,
Yeah,
you
sure.
gain an automatic easement, so you can continue to use it. So I don't know that for your client, depending on how long he's gonna sit there, knowing that, maybe not the best idea. Also, if every single house is built with a corner like that, you might also think of like reactive things, meaning if he tells on the neighbor and everybody knows it's on the corner, well, the neighbor's gonna go tell on him and like create the exact same issue for him. If it's the shed, like if they just built the shed, probably the best thing to do, and really, those people should have gotten a survey before they built the shed. That was not smart. So what you can do is say, hey, you built the shed on my lot. Here's my survey. Look where your shed is on there, which might require him getting another survey that actually shows the shed, to see the exact encroachment of it. So depending on what it's worth to him, and say you need to move this, because you can require that to buy it like that. And you can't just build on someone else's land. So also take into consideration how much is encroaching. If it's like a foot and he's also encroaching a foot, is it really worth it? If the entire shed is on his lot, very likely worth it, right? But to sit back and wait for something, he might sit back and wait too long where they can just keep it there. Gotcha. Also, a lot of times with a fence, and by a lot of times, I mean 100% of the time your client wants to put in a fence, tell them to get a survey. And this might come up, like you told them to get a survey before closing, they said, I don't wanna spend the money on a survey, I don't feel like doing it. A year later, they call you, hey, do you know a good fence guy? Sure, here's a name. Remember, you wanna get a survey before you put the fence in. Same thing with the shed, if you put the fence in and it's an inch on the neighbor's property, they can make you move it because you put it on their property and you can't just do that. Unless the HOA requires that and then they get all the approvals and whatnot. But you wanna get the survey to know what your property lines are before you put anything accidentally on someone else's property. Surveys do take kind of a long time and they're not expensive, so that's why it's good to have the conversation like at your buyer consult about surveys. And then when you're going to put in an offer, hey, you wanna get a survey on this, I know we talked about it. If it's something like I wanna put in a pool, I wanna put in a greenhouse, whatever, you really wanna give yourself enough time for the closing to get the survey back. And so the way I would handle that is, oh, you love 123 Cherry Street, I know you want a survey, let's call the survey company right now before I type up your offer to see when they can get out there to do the survey. Oh, it's gonna take them 3 weeks to get out there, let's make closing in 4 weeks, right? So you don't wanna know it's gonna take 3 weeks to get out there and then make your closing 2 weeks from now. So take that into consideration when you're writing your offer, is really the best way to do it. If they don't want a survey, whatever you try, you can't force them to do anything. If they're buying acreage, they really should get a survey.
Definitely.
Like I would be a lot more aggressive about you need to get that. Even the land contract talks about a survey. Whereas the purchase and sale contract, other than like sort of mentioning it in the title exam section, there's not really a specific paragraph for surveys. So depending on the property too, some of them, they absolutely need one, some of them, they really should get one, some of them, you should recommend it, if they don't get it, whatever, it's their loss. The cost of it, and really the timing is gonna depend on where the property is and how big the property is. So the farther out from Metro Atlanta it is, likely the longer it's gonna take them to get out there to do the survey. The bigger the piece of land, the more expensive it's gonna be.
Right.
I would say the like bare minimum cost of a survey would be around $500.
Yeah.
And it goes up from there and can go up quite a bit depending on the size of the property. So it's not a cheap thing, but you should always recommend it. And again, if your client decides not to, fine. We kind of talked about this a little bit. Again, stuff that's gonna show up on a survey is not necessarily what would show up on your title exam. So that's one thing one kind of pushback that you'll get on surveys is I'm getting a title exam. Why would I need a survey? It's because it shows something different. So be prepared to have that conversation with your client as well.
Actually, if, say someone's buying, property and there's been a shed sitting on it forever, and then you find out, is that adverse, too late? It's like, if it's been sitting there for 20 years, then is it too late for to handle it as a
It really depends, and I don't know that, I think it's smart for you guys to get into saying, oh, this definitely should qualify for adverse possession or prescriptive easement. I think your involvement in those conversations is, you might wanna talk to an attorney, I know it's been there a while, there are a couple ways that people can acquire property, either use of it or ownership of it, so you might wanna talk to an attorney. So you've told them it exists, but you have not said whether or not it's on this property. Yeah, I think that kind of oversteps into,
Good, because I wouldn't.
Thanks.
Is there a time, I mean, prescriptive easement, 7 years, 10 years, is it just?
Yeah,
How
so-
long they've been there, or is there?
yeah, and that's not the only requirement, but prescriptive easement would be 7 years, adverse possession, I think is 20 years. But again, there's a lot of other factors that play into it.
That's the state.
Yeah, it's more of a state thing versus a county thing, but they look at the totality of the circumstances, kind of what we say, and look at the different, requirements of it, and then what's gone on, how they fit in those boxes, whether they check those boxes to see. So that's why I say, and I wouldn't even really feel comfortable looking at a scenario and saying, oh, yes, that qualifies, oh, no, that doesn't, because I don't look at that from that angle every day. So I definitely don't think y'all should step in and say, oh, this is this, but in telling your client, don't sit back and wait because this is possible. Not saying it'll happen, but it's possible. So you give in value without giving like legal advice, if that makes sense. And that just, again, if you're doing like a pool, you wanna build something on there, either make it happen during due diligence, meaning getting the survey during due diligence, or make it a separate contingency. But any title issues, you don't need due diligence.
So if you were to build like a pool or some sort of structure, you know, you get a survey, then you go ahead and get whatever that is done. Should you get an updated survey to verify that it actually is within those borders?
You can, it's not a bad idea, I think that for a lot of people, that's a large expense that they wouldn't necessarily wanna do. But as far as making sure that the pool company or whatever did their job correctly, it doesn't hurt, just to make sure, and that way you can say, you guys did it wrong, here's the survey, here's the plans, here's your failure. So not a bad idea, but that's just kind of a cost benefit analysis, if you will. To make sure. All right, so let's look at some examples of surveys, and we'll look at what works out, pointing out kind of important things to look for. And then, also issues that come up. Let me see. For my Zoom people. All right. Y'all know how to minimize this, so I can pull up the PDF. Stop.
Well, you're sharing right now, so it should have. Was it on your slides?
Here, it's right here. Okay. Okay. Look at me, I'm so tech savvy. So good. All right. So what do we notice on this particular survey that we find interesting?
Original lot.
Why is that interesting?
What's new?
Yeah,
Where's the new one?
exactly. So y'all see and maybe I should stand it over here to kind of show. So the original lot line, this wording is right here, right? So this kind of darker line is the actual current lot line. But the original means at some point that lot was made smaller, okay? Not a problem, not necessarily something to worry about, just something to be aware of, right? Because you can't just willy-nilly change the lot line. So there had to be some sort of either boundary line agreement signed or some sort of deed for that little sliver of property. So what's a boundary line?
You know,
Hey, Sharon.
Don't know what a boundary line agreement is?
It's an agreement that this is the new boundary line.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's self-explanatory there. So you've got two people, this is the boundary line, but maybe I built my fence up here and the neighbor says, I don't want to fool with that, it's fine, you can just have that sliver of land. They can either deed it to me or we can all agree that the new boundary line is over here. So one of those two things happen, and either way is fine, because everyone has acknowledged this is the new line and everyone signed off on it. So that's what happened here. What else do we see on this one? Anything of note, not necessarily problems, just of note.
I will note that I don't even know what I'm looking at.
So here's another thing. This 100-foot, BL.
Are you a good boundary line?
So really, a lot of times you'll see this labeled as like SBL, but it's the setback one. So it's important to know that if you're in, like, lot 2 is what we have the survey of, right? So y'all see, and we know it's lot 2 because this is the only one that's fully enclosed. So this setback line means 100 feet from the road you cannot build on. So you can't build until you cross this line right here. So that's important to know, because what if this almost looks like 3 little pieces, right? And what surveys will almost always do is have some sort of key or legend that shows you what the different style line means. This one is a little bit older, so it's not necessarily the best quality of lines. But these bold lines are our actual boundary lines. And then these skinnier lines mean other things. So if you wanted, like if someone wanted to buy this, try to build 3 houses on it, because it looks like maybe they could, you can, because this entire 100-foot area, you can't build on until after you've crossed it. So that's important to note if this was just raw land. The other thing that I want to point out is this land lot line. So does anyone know what a land lot line means? What a land lot is?
It's their area of land, like the lot, like that they have. Points don't count today.
So, but the way that properties are accounted for by the county is you start with the county, and then you've got land lots, which is a huge piece of property. Sometimes you have districts, so it's just narrowing down where you are in the county, in the world. So a land lot is gonna be a huge piece of property, and nobody owns an entire land lot. I mean, I guess it's not impossible, but exceedingly rare, right? It's a huge piece of property, and then within that land lot, people own different pieces of property. So your lot line is gonna be very different than your land lot, okay? So, number 2, this parcel 2, which is what our survey is on, you can see that they're in land lot 329 and 330, because this line that's in this back third of the lot. So when you're looking at a legal description, it'll say, you know, that certain tractor parcel of land located in land lots 329 and 330 of whatever county we're in. So you go to those land lots to start looking, because otherwise, where do you even start? Right, if you actually wanted to go find the property with the survey. So just know that a land lot is not the same thing as a lot line. Little off topic, but that's also helpful in counties when you have a buyer who wants to go apply for the homestead exemption. They make them type in all the different pieces of their legal description, which seems like a really big ask for buyers in my opinion, but whatever, but they do. So what I see a lot of people doing is plugging their lot number in where the county's asking for land lot. two different things. Your land lot is not your lot. Okay,
What's the circle? So that's the number circles that's,
this like 329 and
or
329.
no, the 1, 2, 3.
So this is the tract or the lot.
Just that one,
So it starts up here
okay,
and goes all the way, sorry, apparently I can't draw a straight line with my finger.
all the way
Here
there, but there's a setback.
to here, all the way up to
Okay.
here. So if you own tract 2, you own this front bit, you just can't build on it.
Usually there's a key on the survey to indicate.
A lot of
Yeah.
times. Yeah. But this is probably for someone like in a neighborhood, right? So their neighbor owns tract 1, the neighbor behind them owns
Okay.
tract 3. But we're only thinking of buying tract 2. So that's what we did the survey on. They're just showing you that 1 lives over here and 3 lives back here. Okay,
Where does a buyer get the legal description from?
so you can technically, where you find it is the deed. So I'm always happy to pull that. If it's a Georgia property, you find the deed. If it's a property they're buying exactly what was deeded to the seller, which is the case 95% of the time, right? But if what they're buying is the lot with the house on it and the lot next door, might be 2 deeds if there's 2 separate addresses. So that's the only time I say to be kind of careful, or if it's, the seller owns 10 acres and they only want to sell off 3 acres, then you're either gonna have to get a survey for that, or we're gonna have to show that he bought it in separate pieces and they're just selling off this one piece. So those would be the only exceptions, but 95% of the time, you just look at the deed, that's what the legal description is.
Oh, yeah, I think you just said where they filed a homestead, and they can put it all in.
Oh, they'll get a copy of the deed at the closing.
Oh,
So they'll look to that, and it's like right in the center of it. So there's like the fancy legalese, says who the buyer, who the seller is, defines the property, and then some more legalese. So it's typically in the middle. Sometimes in the middle, it'll say Exhibit A, and then it's like another page. But yeah, they should always get that at closing. It's not gonna be, the recorded deed at closing, but it'll be a copy of the signed deed.
Actually, the
Yeah.
setback line purposes near the road would be so the county or city could come and expand that road into your property, correct?
That's not the only reason for it. That could be part of
But
it.
like piping underneath sewers, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And just like general safety, right? And for driveways, how can you turn into the house if there's no space? So there's a lot of things that go into that. But they're all gonna be different lengths or widths,
Right,
however you
yeah.
wanna think about it. So just depending on the county, the city, what they wanna do with it, what they think is safe, what the rest of that area is doing. A lot of times, like looks go into it. Like if you don't wanna see any of the houses, the county might have some sort of ordinance that's like you need at least X amount of trees in your front yard, that kind of thing plays into it. But I'm sure some of it is the taking part.
Now, there was like she mentioned, like the utility easement, that would show up on there as well, correct?
So long as that easement existed when this survey was done. So if you buy raw land and then you put an easement on the property because you want to install sewer, water, whatever, that's not, like the surveyor's not gonna auto update the survey.
Right.
So it's whatever exists on the property at the time of the survey. Now, when you call for a survey, you wanna talk to the survey company about what you want to show up. Because I think some survey companies can do simply a boundary line and not actually show any easements or anything. So you want and I would have your client talk to them, figure out what they really want and what they wanna pay for, because there's certain things that they'll measure and not measure. But your average survey is gonna show the easements.
Are you gonna go over the difference between a survey and an alpha survey?
I'll let it go. But this one is sideways, but we'll still work through that. What do we see on this one?
There's a fence that crosses the lot line in the back of the property. You got a metal fence and it crosses over. And then it's in theory on the other person's property behind it. So if you look at it, where you've got it turned, it's back here, I think. Am I reading that correctly?
So the metal fence, I would say this is, an example of this probably being in a property where the HOA requires some sort of connection. Because if you look, this metal, so we've got the metal fence. What it doesn't show is who owns this fence, because see, it also goes over here.
Yeah.
The wire fence, and then it also goes this way as well. So yes, to some degree, if the neighbor owns this line, we've encroached a smidge up here. If we own this line, we've encroached all through here, right? But it could be, so this one, I wouldn't necessarily look at that fence and say, oh, it's a huge issue. It's probably, they wanted to connect, and you can never really do that perfectly. But yes, there is
Okay.
some encroachment to some degree on there. My thought is that the neighbor probably owns this metal fence, and it's not us encroaching, because surveyors tend to know that. An example of that is right here. See where it says our steps over 2.3 feet?
Okay.
So typically, a surveyor is gonna note that it is an encroachment. And it'll say like over the property line or something to that effect. So what you'll see there, and if it's a buyer, what you have to think about is, okay, A, are we really that worried about the steps? B, Mr. Seller, how long have your steps been? Oh, I put them in 15 years ago. What are the chances that this neighbor is all of a sudden gonna have a problem with it and get you to move them? Probably pretty low. So what would be a good idea is if they have not already done so, to get some sort of encroachment agreement with the neighbor. That way the neighbor can never make them move those steps.
Or if a neighbor moves and somebody else comes in and they have a survey done and they're all like sneakerish about it, like.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
exactly
now you
right.
gotta take your steps out, blah, blah, blah.
Yes,
Okay.
because all encroachment agreements, boundary line agreements, easements, those sort of things, they should all be drafted to run with the land, which means owners can come and go, but that sticks to the land. So they buy it subject to that recorded document.
Driveways, so.
Cool.
Yep, the neighbor's driveway is on the property, so y'all see that right here. Which that happens sometimes too. So it's over just a little bit. Again, you have to think buyer, the neighbor has the driveway on your property a little bit. How much does that bother you? Not that much. I didn't even know until we got the survey. Okay, that's fine. Let's still get an agreement with that neighbor so they don't accidentally or on purpose acquire that land. It's still your land. So if it's the driveway's gone, and you could even word it, if the driveway's report for whatever reason, you gotta report on your land. So still a good idea to get that agreement. What else do we see?
There's a setback line of 7.5 feet on the, if you're looking at the front of the house, I guess it would be on the left side of the property.
Yeah.
And then also on the back side, on the opposite side of the
Yeah.
property.
So what April's talking about is right here. And right here. So as compared to the other property, this one has a very small setback line, only 7.5 feet versus the 100 feet we saw in the other one. So like I said, they can vary greatly, but notice it's gotta be, all of the structures being built have to be built within those setback lines.
So the steps are definitely
The
bad.
steps are over all things, all of the things. So that would be the other thing, and possibly the even bigger issue would be the setback line. Because a county could come in and say, you can't have anything there. Now, is it the end of the world to take the steps down? It's probably not. Talking about how expensive things are, your steps being over is a lot cheaper to take them down and move them. Inconvenient, I'm sure, but still easier than the corner of your house is there.
Actually, the undisturbed buffer that is at the top of your picture. It's on 3 sides of the property. It sounds like that's something you're not ever allowed to build onto, even though it's within your property, the county has designated that as an area that has to be maintained exactly as this, like it's forested or it's whatever.
Yeah, and typically we're gonna see those buffer zones, like when water is involved, so there's probably some sort of creek that runs there, could be forest stuff. But yeah, so you just
So you don't
can't
have
build,
property, but you can't do anything with it.
right, right, that's exactly right. And, I mean, buffer zones are fairly common, again, especially when there's water, and I think part of that is a safety concern, right? Because you don't know how much the water could build up,
Right.
you don't know what erosion is gonna do, all that stuff.
You can, I mean, you can use it, you just can't build anything.
Okay. Well, yeah, you can walk on it, but you can't re-landscape, you can't pull anything down
Right.
that you own it, you're taxed on it, but you have zero control over it.
Well, I wouldn't say it's zero control, and like,
Yeah.
if you've got trees that you wanted to take down, I would just call the county, you might need to get a permit. So it's not like I can never touch it ever, you definitely can't build on it.
You could re-landscape this most likely.
Really? Okay.
Oh, yeah. They
So
just,
that's why I was asking, like, undisturbed, like that, like never do anything.
They just mean you can't like break the dirt, tear everything down, build on it.
Okay.
Now, sometimes like using the creek as an example, it could be that it runs, like, let's say it's somewhere here-ish.
Yeah.
And then you've got a neighbor that lives up here and you wanna build a little like bridge over the creek. Just get the county's approval and most likely they'll let you do stuff like that. You just can't put your house back there.
Hey, Ashley.
Yeah.
In my last neighborhood, my house backed up to another neighborhood. And there is a fence that separated the 2 neighborhoods, my fence. My neighbor took down, I don't know, 16, 20 trees very close to my fence. And it turns out, because I called the county compliance office or something like that, I can't remember. It turns out that that place where they took down those trees was in a county buffer owned by the HOA of my neighborhood. So they made that neighbor replant those trees. They came up, they made them meet with a county arborist, and the arborist drew up a plan, and the neighbor, in addition to now spending tens of thousands of dollars to take down trees that weren't on their property, had to replace those trees according to the county arborist plan.
Yeah, that can definitely happen. A, it wasn't their land. B, it was some sort of buffer, undisturbed. Sometimes there's like agricultural easement requirements on property. So that can definitely happen. And I've seen that with HOA requirements as well. So I had one where there were these huge, like, I don't know, like Japanese maple or some sort of cherry, fancy, expensive tree, and these people came in, cut them down after they bought the house, and the HOA made them put them back too. So not only do you wanna be talking to the county, but you might wanna talk to the HOA. But either way, don't cut down trees you don't own. It's a good rule. Which another reason, get a survey, right? So we talk about, like, you wanna put fence in, you wanna build something on the property. But also, if you've got trees that you wanna take down, that you think are like towards the back of the property, probably a really good idea to go ahead and get a survey to see who even owns the trees. And then if you don't own them, then you definitely don't worry about getting approvals from county, city, HOA. If you do, then that would be your next step, but determine that you actually own them. And if your neighbors to the back had done that, Sharon, they would have not torn down the trees.
Yeah, it made me kind of mad because when I talked with the neighbor, I asked her, did you do a survey? And she said, no, it's our backyard, so we assumed they were our trees. I'm like, well,
Assuming does.
I mean, you can look on public records and see that your lot line only goes back about 100 feet and you cut trees 125 feet from the house. Obviously, that's not your property.
And you make sure who's cutting the trees, and there's that happened to my sister. They had huge, they still had property behind
Fence.
their pool house, little pool house they had built. And they had trees that went all the way up, could not see back there, where the neighbors were behind them, where the landscape had a tall house. And the landscapers went all the way back. My sister came home was all down. So they haven't followed the laws. I mean, it was, these were people they went to church with. And, you know, so we got kind of, they knew them, but they knew them. And it was. They was doing the landscaper. The landscaper shouldn't have gone back that far.
Right.
So that you need to make sure you know that's exactly right. Well, it's finally just.
And it's important because it's not just an issue of boundaries and lot lines and all that. It affects your property values. So if there's no longer a nice wooded private area behind your home, that affects your property value and it won't sell for as much. It's an important issue.
Well, and for a lot of people, it's the privacy factor that the trees offer. Now, keep in mind, really all you have control over is what you own. So like, if you own 100 feet back and there's all these gorgeous trees 125 feet back, and your neighbor does own the trees and they tear them down, you can be upset all you want, but they're not your trees.
Right.
Now, if there's like HOA rules, you can complain to the HOA and do that, but if they're your trees, absolutely. Like I have 2 huge magnolias in the back of my property and our neighbors to the back keep asking us like, can you cut them down? Because it's affecting the light our grass gets. I'm like, no, you can forget it. Touch my magnolias and see what happens.
John Schools, picture the Braves, he
Absolutely.
built his neighbor's home.
This is such interesting stuff. I forgot about this. Well, some of it, because I'm not seeing that one.
All right, so flipping over to the third one, this might be our last or second to last example there. What do we see on this one that's interesting? Oh, and Kathy, did I see your hand up earlier?
Yes, it, and it may just be overkill. I was wondering if there was a survey that would show any like old wells or septic tanks, or is that just a whole nother process through the county?
No, you can have those on the survey. I don't know about old wells. I think that depends on what's like still there and showing up. Like if it was a well that was filled in, it might not show up. But I would just talk to your surveyor and see like, hey, this is what we want to see. Which survey package do we need to get that? So septic typically does show up, but the old wells, I would ask the surveyor if there's a specific way they go to do that.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. So what do y'all see on this survey?
Oh, that's old deck.
You think it's an old deck or you hope it is?
I hope it is, because they just built it,
Why is it a problem?
because it's over the boundary line. Setback line.
Well, yeah, so it's over the boundary setback line, that's exactly right. So we see there's this 50-foot line,
Completely.
right? Yeah, like the entire thing is over. And honestly, the house runs like right up to it. But what else is problematic about this deck and where it is?
It's in the drain, it's draining.
So if the county needs to come deal with the drain and they need to tear the deck down to do it, they can do that, depending on the language of the easement. But most of the time, if the county is the one benefiting from the easement, they absolutely are gonna give themselves the right to tear down your deck, right? So that would be problematic to me, and we know that decks are not exactly cheap. Right, like it's a lot of money and effort that went into putting that deck together, whereas a small set of stairs, if you have to tear it down, what a bummer, but like, not the end of the world. Your deck is kind of end of the world territory there. What else do we see?
To the left of the deck, the fence south of the property line, so it's over that property line a bit, and also in the back left corner, they've got a whole section that is even further over the property line.
Yep,
Well, the fence is the subdivision fence, so I'm taking that's there from the sub.
well, I would say maybe this connection point, the subdivision might have required that. This is over quite a bit. Right, like there's a connection, but this is over a good little chunk there. Again, probably for most people, this is not gonna stop them from wanting to buy the house. they can say, okay, our fence is over a couple feet, if the neighbor agrees to let us leave it there, not a big deal. But for some people, it could be an issue there. What else, Chelsea?
Concrete driveway and a concrete sidewalk.
Which is fine. So looking at this, so see this 35-foot setback line, how it curves? This kind of like a driveway is not really a building. So the driveway is fine to be in that setback line, or else you'd never be able to have any driveway, because what's the point if it doesn't connect to the road, right? It's just building structures that you can't do. And then we've got another natural buffer zone here as well. So, the subdivision fence is here, but I would still talk about this part of the fence.
What would you do? Just kind of approach the other landowner and say, look, we did a survey, looking to buy this house, we noticed this is on your property. They're like, oh, I had no idea. Then you're like, well, what do you want to do about it?
So if you have the survey before you buy the property,
Correct.
what I would probably do is do some sort of amendment that requires the seller to get a boundary line, or not a boundary line, an encroachment agreement with their neighbor, because the seller's gonna be in a better position to say, hey, neighbor that I've lived next to for the last 8 years, we just found out that the fence is a little bit over. I just wanna, we drafted this agreement, you review it, take your time, but if we can get this signed, just so that there's no argument regarding the fence, is probably the better way to do it. If you're getting this after you've bought the property, then obviously the seller is not relevant anymore. You as the buyer are gonna have to approach the neighbor. And they say, I had no idea, hopefully they're nice, no problem, we'll sign that, and everybody moves on. Because something that's just a couple of feet is very rarely gonna be an issue, especially if the neighbors get along. But sometimes, if the neighbor's a jerk, now you've opened the can of worms. But the other thing to keep in mind with surveys is that if you get a survey, it's probably a good idea to send it to the closing attorney, so we can take a look at it and let you know, because we look at these more often and, we can talk about it and give classes, and I'm happy to walk you through it. But we look at them more, right? So we're gonna be able to find the issues a little bit quicker than y'all are gonna be able to pinpoint the issues. And that feels like a lot of pressure for you guys to review the survey for your client, for sending it to me. But keep in mind, if you do send it over to us, any of these issues, like the fence being over, all of that, will be an exception on the title insurance policy. Because now I've seen it, so we are gonna list it. The title insurance policy is always gonna say stuff the buyer knows about, we don't cover, so it really shouldn't change the buyer's position, because they could very easily prove, you got this survey a month before buying it, you knew this was here, forget it. But just so it's not a surprise, and so your clients are not angry when they're like, well, we should have sent it to the attorney. We will make it an exception on the phone. Well, we will send it to the title insurance company, confirm the exceptions that they require, and then pass that information back to you guys. All right, and that might be about what we've got time for, unless y'all wanna do one more, it doesn't matter.
David's got a plan to 11:30.
Okay, well then, we will call it a day. Y'all have questions?
Thanks so much, Ashley. This was really good.
So glad. The other
Evans?
kind of helpful thing about a survey that I've seen is if you're dealing with sort of an interesting shaped property, a lot of times people have no idea what they're buying or selling. And so if you have something that's not like, the clear neighborhood lot situation, that's a little bit easier to figure out, because maybe you're a couple feet off in either direction, but you know the general shape of the lot. But if you have something real weird, funny shaped, really you wanna know what you're actually buying. Because counting on the seller to tell you is not the best way to do it, but also what's definitive is the legal description in your contract. So if the seller tells you, I own this square, but the legal description, you're missing this top corner, all you bought, regardless of what the seller tells you,
Right.
is the legal description. So be careful, and a lot of the bigger post-closing issues I see are discrepancies over what the buyer and seller thought was being conveyed and what they put into the contract is being conveyed. Because note that there's a disconnect in what what people think we do and what we actually do. Like, I don't go to the property, right? I don't look at it. So I have no idea what it looks like unless for whatever reason I get curious and pull up like Google Maps or something. So I go off of the legal description, and any attorney is gonna do that. That's all the information we have. That's what we run the title exam on. So just keep that in mind, and certainly call and ask, like, hey, we think this is around 6 acres. The title examiner doesn't insure acreage. The title insurance company doesn't insure acreage, but they insure ownership of the legal description you've set out.
Okay.
So if your legal description says that it's 6.2 acres and then describes the property, and it's really 6.5, and that description is correct, there's no title insurance coverage for that, like 0.3 that you thought you were getting. So just be careful on that and know that the actual description is what's definitive. But if it's something like, I think it's about 6 acres, we look at what the county has and see it's only like 3 acres, we got a problem, right? We're not gonna say whether it's 5.5 or 6, but like if you think it's 6 and I say, it looks like 3, you know that we missed a piece, right?
Also, if your neighbor builds a fence or you build a fence and your neighbor wants to build a fence and they want to attach to your fence. That first house is like, put fence on it. The neighbor, one Sunday morning, would just attach, she was building a fence, she just attached to me. So I think that's something you need to think about too, and definitely the opportunity is, first you get to make sure your fence, or their fence is on their property line before you do
But
that.
that's usually the case, isn't it?
Yeah, typically in a subdivision, they're gonna
Yeah.
attach. The HOA is gonna require the attachment. So
Yeah.
you're gonna have to get the approval to put the fence in, they're gonna ask for the survey, and then they're gonna require the attachment. At that point, you know there's gonna be an encroachment one way or the other.
Right.
And so what you wanna do is get that encroachment agreement with that neighbor.
Yeah.
And I've always heard, oh, go ahead,
Yeah,
Connie.
I just heard the hammering and it worked,
Gotcha.
which is fine, I just asked. I paid for the, put that fence in,
Yeah,
you know, I mean, you're just attached, you got the fence.
piggybacking,
Eventually, you got that.
sure,
Yeah, which is always gonna be the case, but
Yeah.
you wanna get the proper approvals and the proper paperwork set up. But as the person who put the fence in first, it's probably not real fair for you to be upset if you wanna attach,
Well, yeah.
because your fence was already there.
Sure.
The HOA is probably gonna make them, it's stupid for them to add an extra little piece,
Oh, we
leave a gap.
expect it to, but it's just.
The respective asking and giving you that
The
extra.
expense, the labor, you know, they're getting the benefit of that. I guess they would do the own return to reciprocate, but
Yeah.
when you don't ask. You just tell.
Well, and the benefit of having that encroachment agreement is also defining who's taking care of that section of the fence, whose responsibility is it?
Yeah.
And so, you know, they might say, you put it up first, you gotta take care of it. You might say, you wanna attach to mine, you should take care of it. And maybe the reality is you share the cost or what have you, but the
Yeah.
point is you agree to it
Yeah.
and then you're good to go from there on out.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, of course.
Very helpful.
Good, good. Well, if y'all think of other questions, feel free to holler at me. You know where to find me.
thank you, Ashley.
Well, I took time out of my day to come here.
Thank you.
Really,
Services are important.
They're really important and nobody ever does that, which is so crazy to me.
Yeah, I guess there's one.
Are you busy with Medicare and stuff like that?
So much.